All right, welcome to Chapter 7. We're going to talk about the physical geography of Central Asia. We kind of lump some other areas in with Central Asia. This is going to include the Caucasus, which is a mountain range area. It also includes Russia, and parts of it are known as Siberia. So we're going to talk about physical features, land area, climate, all those things we typically cover in lesson 1. So we've already talked about just how big Russia is. It is the largest country by land area, not by population. In fact, most of the population of Russia tends to live over on the western side. That's where we're going to see the big cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg. Not as many people live up here in the northern part or as much in the eastern part of the country. But there's some other countries that exist here: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. So those are all of our Stan countries. And I believe maybe in lesson 2, we'll talk about that Stan is a Persian word that means the land of. So the Persians controlled parts of this area. And there's really a lot of an influence from the Middle East. So other regions we've covered so far, we've seen mainly influenced by like China. Now we're going to see a big influence by places like Saudi Arabia and other places in the Middle East. So much of these countries in this region are Islamic. That's kind of getting more into culture. So we're going to try to stick to physical geography here. Georgia and Armenia. So there is a country called Georgia. I know we have a state called Georgia, but there is a country called that as well. And then there's also Azerbaijan here. A lot of these countries probably seem a little bit strange to us name-wise because they are very small. I can remember, I think I met somebody in college that their parents were from Tajikistan, and I thought they were kind of messing with me because I was like, okay, I've heard of Afghanistan, but I didn't know Tajikistan was a country. They are countries. This is kind of where it talks about that Russia is 25% larger than Canada. So Canada is the second largest country. So it is massive. And it's really the only place we're going to talk about this year that really can be classified as both being in 2 continents, Europe and Asia. The mountains of the Caucasus and the Ural Mountains kind of divide Europe and Asia. So you can see the Ural Mountains here that divide down the middle. Well, not even really the middle of Russia, but this part over here has much more of a European influence. It's probably predominantly what we would think of as Russia, but as you head more east, it becomes more kind of, the people become more Asian in appearance. The culture would reflect more of that in customs, I think. But over here, we would see much more of a European influence. And this is really the part, because this is where most of the people live. You can kind of see the number of cities listed on the map. They're either kind of on the southern portion here or they're over here. This is kind of what we think of as Russia, even though it's a massive area. All right, moving on. Can't seem to move my slide. There we go. All right, there we can see the Stan countries. Kazakhstan is one of the biggest ones. Many of these countries were actually formed out of Russia. So Russia, we'll talk about this in a later section, was the Soviet Union, which was communist, and it fell. Communism fell, and they kind of became a democracy. After that, a republic. And some of these countries gained their independence at that time. So Kazakhstan was definitely one of these that was controlled by the Soviet Union, and many of these other countries are the same way. The Caucasus region is these countries of Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, kind of the smaller countries that are located more on the eastern side. They're kind of bordered by the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And you can see those bodies of water over here. This is kind of showing about elevations, but another thing we need to keep in mind is the various climate types that exist. This region, there are some volcanoes in the area. I think it says here that they have not erupted in thousands of years, though, so many of them are dormant. There are mountains in the region. We've already talked about some of those. I think we can kind of skip past this. The Ural Mountains are important though because they do split through Russia, running north and south. And this is what I said, they're kind of a boundary, a mark a boundary between Europe and Asia, along with the Caucasus Mountains. So we're going to talk about Siberia here, and Siberia is this massive section of land in Russia, and much of it is really, really cold. In fact, we'll talk about later on that there were these prison camps called gulags, and many of them were in Siberia. So the Russian people would, if they were sent to a prison, it was often in Siberia, kind of really harsh climate to live in. Parts of it are tundra, and tundra is a treeless zone that's near the Arctic Circle. It can also be in high mountain elevations. I think in Siberia, it's mainly because it's so far north in the Arctic Circle. Um, Here's a video about it. Maybe I'll just play a few seconds of this so we can see. We won't watch the whole thing, but so summers are very short, 50 to 60 days. I mean, summers for us, basically last kind of from like May until August. Really, I mean, we're not going to go based on exactly when the first day of fall is or the first day of summer is, but like when is the climate kind of reflecting that, those summer temperatures. So 50 to 60 days of summer, and many times I think the temperature only gets up to be like 50 degrees in summertime. So, it gets to be really, really cold. So permafrost and tundra are two terms that I'm going to have you kind of write down here in a few moments. So here we can see a permafrost. It's this kind of layer underneath the ground, and it is soil, but it remains frozen all year round. And this drawing is actually not very accurate because the permafrost keeps trees from growing because trees need lots of room for their roots. So it can't spread out and get deep into the ground. So usually trees will not grow there. Only like small shrubs and things like that that have shallow roots can grow in the permafrost. So these areas of Siberia you're not going to see that are really far north like that. You wouldn't see trees. Now there are the taiga area where there is trees that develop, and it's actually like home to like 20% of the trees in the world are in Siberia. There are areas that are dry, and there's two major deserts here. I looked this pronunciation up. I think it's Kazil, which I believe is probably a Persian word or maybe Arabic. Kazil Kum, and then the Karakum, these deserts that kind of exist in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. So we're talking about a massive area here. So there's lots of different climate types. Here we can see that. So all that purple is subarctic tundra climate. So this is much of Russia. Only kind of this area over here, this kind of south western portion of Russia would be, anything even, more moderate in climate type. But there are multiple climates that exist in this region. So the other one talked about here is the steppe. This is where I think it says the summers get to be only about 50 degrees, which is not, really probably warm enough to grow many types of crops. Maybe certain things like potatoes can grow in cooler climate, but not going to be able to grow a lot of things that we would grow here in Indiana. in the summertime. There are major seas as well, and we don't really have a slide talking about this. Lake Baikal is the name of this. This is I was just looking up information about this lake. It is incredibly amazing. So it's the deepest lake in the world. That's one thing that's kind of unique. 5,000 feet is the max depth of that, whereas like I think even the Great Lakes is probably more like 1,000 feet. So it's extremely deep, like deep as parts of the ocean, you know. Um, so that's kind of amazing. It also, because it's so deep, contains a massive volume of water. So it is the largest lake by volume. And you could actually take all of the Great Lakes and combine them together in the United States, and it's still bigger. Lake Baikal is still bigger than that. So pretty fascinating. I think there's some kind of unusual life that lives at the bottom of the lake here because it's just so far down there. So I find that really interesting. We'll talk more about the Aral Sea a little bit later on because it's had some interesting things happen with it. So multiple waterways. And this is kind of interesting too. So because like the Siberian sea is so far north and so cold, much of it freezes. And they need boats that can travel through this. So they have these icebreaker ships, and they're specially designed to break through the ice, like most ships, like you know probably about the Titanic, that it sank because it hit an iceberg. But these ships are designed to be able to cut through the ice in the way that they're designed. So you can see a boat doing that here. They use like an incredible amount of fuel to do this. I guess some are even nuclear powered, and it says they use a pound of uranium per day. So I assume that that's quite a bit for a ship to use. So kind of fascinating. Maybe you've seen pictures of this. I think I've seen a few movies. There was one movie where there's this whale that gets like stuck out in the sea and it can't get through because there's ice all around it. And they like recruit the Russians to come in and bring the special ship to bust through the ice to get and free this whale. It's a true story. I can't remember the name of that movie, but yeah, Miracle. That was it. I think Miracle. Maybe there was also a hockey movie named Miracle. So I'm not really sure. I think my wife is over here fact checking it for me to look it up. So lots of resources in this part, especially Siberia has a lot of resources up here. Trees in the southern part that can be used. And that's kind of what this is really talking about. So Siberia has one of the some of the greatest amounts of natural resources. These cold areas would have a lot of oil and other things like minerals that can be pulled out of the ground. This is where it talks about the taiga has 20% of the world's trees. Again, this is just talking about oil and other natural resources that exist there. Yeah, so I think we can move on to this last slide. So I'm going to kind of just talk about this for a second, but this should be something that you're writing each of these things down. I'm not using a note sheet this time. I'm going to have you use these 8 kind of key parts of this section. So these are the notes that I'm going to check to make sure that you have done. I think it's really just too difficult with some of this virtual learning that we're doing to take and do a lot of extensive notes. So I'm going to limit it to these 8 things. So you can pause the video right now to write these down, or you could go onto Google Classroom, bring up the notes that way. But these will be expected that you're writing these down. I don't necessarily need you writing everything down from the section, but these 8 things, take a moment, pause the video, write them down, and that will do it until we get to lesson 2. Thanks.